Okay, welcome to another fun Friday of 100 Fridays, 100 stitches. Tonight we are going to learn an extension of the puff stitch. So this week you saw that some of the stitches that we do can be done into modification stitches. It's like the granny square being the flat granny square. We already talked about the puff stitch at the very beginning. That was the first stitch we did. So now we are going to learn the dip down puff stitch, or the drop puff stitch as it's also known. So to start this, you're going to do your chain and then one row of single crochet. That's the blue, as you see here. I chained and then I turned and then did single crochet all the way down. Then I changed colors and I made the puff stitch in red. And this puff stitch was done differently. It's done with 3 loops instead of 7, like the puff stitch. And I'm going to show you that here in a second. But you'll do one row of just a puff stitch, a chain 1, a puff stitch, a chain 1, a puff stitch. When you do the chain 1, you're skipping a stitch on your blue row. Now I've changed to white and I'm getting ready to do the second stitch. With this stitch, you're going to want to change colors. It's going to look almost braided, and the only way to get that look is to change your colors. So this will be one of those pieces that you'll want to change colors every other row. You don't have to literally have 10 colors or 20 colors or how many rows you have. I'm going to use 3 colors. I'm going to do blue, red, and white, and then just alternate them. So you can keep that in mind, pick a few colors that you want to use, but make sure every other row is a different color because that's going to help the stitch actually show up. So now we're ready for the white row. I've color changed here on the end and I've changed my 2. I'm getting ready to puff stitch. The first puff stitch, normally on a normal puff stitch, would be going into the puff stitch above it, but that's not what we're doing. On some other stitches, like granny squares, you put it in the hole of the previous row. We're not doing that either. We're actually going to dip down and put it in this chain that we skipped here on the first row. So the first stitch is going to go into this blue stitch right here. We're going to gather on our needle, go down, I'm going to try to get where you can see this, into the chain that you skipped on the blue row. Can you see that on our needle right there? There's the V. You're going to grab your yarn over and pull up. You're going to yarn under again and go into that blue stitch and pull through. You're only going to do it twice to give you those 3 stitches. That's it. So instead of having 7, you're only going to have those 5. Then pull through all of them and chain 1. So there's your puff stitch and it dips down into that row. Again, the same thing here. You're going to put the next one into the V that's down here where you skipped a chain on that first row. Pull your puff stitch up through. Make sure your hoops are all the same size. That makes your stitch work out a little bit better. Again, you're only going to do it twice. So instead of having 7, you're just going to end up having 5. It's going to be a littler puff stitch and then do your chain 1. Now, as you see, those stitches are going to start to cross like this, and that gives it the braided effect. So again, doing the puff stitch down into the V of the previous row, pull it up and make sure that your stitches are all the same size, and then go again down into that blue row. You can see there that I have left all my threads on because I'm going to change colors a lot, so those will just hang out to the side there. So try not to get them looped into your hand when you're crocheting. But then pull through all of your hoops, and there's your puff stitch, chain 1. I'm going to let you finish that row, and then I'll turn and change back to the blue, and we'll look at that for a little bit. Okay, so now let's jump ahead. We've done our puff stitch in the white all the way down, in between those red puff stitches and down into the blue row. So you can see where the red puff stitch is and then the white puff stitch is. So now we've gotten to the end, we've changed our color back to blue, and we've changed 2 to start this next row. This puff stitch on this row is again not going to go in this stitch or this hole. It's going to go into the V of the red puff stitch before it. So you're going to gather your yarn, go into the red stitch here. When I pick that up, if you'll look on the other side of this, you see there's the V on my needle right there. So that's the stitch you're working in. You're going to pull it through, make sure you keep everything the same level, go in again, and yarn over and come through. All your stitches are the same. In the original puff stitch, you do it a third time and you have 7 loops, but again on this, we're not doing that. We're only doing it twice to get the 2 original loops and then the 3. So when you have that, you go ahead and pull all the way through like the original puff stitch and chain 1. Same thing, you're going to do a puff stitch into the V of the previous row on the red stitch. Right here, you're picking up the stitch that was the top of the red puff stitch. So you're yarning over, you're going in the previous row's puff stitch and pulling out. Make sure all your hoops are even with your needle. Go in again a second time into that puff stitch and pull it through. And then once you have the 5, because you're only going to do 3 extra loops, you're going to go ahead and pull all the way through your puff stitch and chain 1. So you can see those stitches starting to cross into each other. This is that dip down puff stitch. This is where you're dipping down into that previous row beforehand and putting a puff stitch through one row into the other row. So you're still doing the puff stitch, but you're dipping down into the previous row, and your rows start to blend across each other, and you get that dip down kind of spike stitch look, but with a puff stitch. So it looks kind of bubbly and gets kind of chaotic if you're not watching carefully where those V's are from the other stitch. But when we go back this time, I would trade to red, and then I would be puff stitching down from this row down into the white. So I'm going to go ahead and let you finish the blue row, and then we'll come back and show you what it looks like once it's a little further in. Okay, so we finished that red row, and then I went ahead and did real quick another set of running through the colors so you could see how it's going to look. So there's what happens. It looks almost like a braided style. Both sides look the same, so there's no difference between front and back. Looks like they're braided in there. This is the puff stitch. It's dipping down into the previous row every time you make a new row. The row itself is a puff stitch, a chain 1, a puff stitch, a chain 1. When you chain 1, you're skipping a stitch on that row before. When you dip down, instead of dipping into a hole, again you're dipping down into the previous row, the stitch that you skip. And it ends up looking like they're braided through together. So I'm going to show you the stitch itself because it's a little different than the puff that I taught you on the other video. You're going to puff stitch through the blue row, dip down into the previous white row, into that stitch that you left there. You're going to pull up, make sure all your hoops are even. You're going to do it a second time into the same stitch, but that is where you're going to leave it. You're only going to do it twice to add 3 hoops. Total, there'll be 5 hoops on your needle. Remember the original puff stitch, there's 7, so that's a little different. Yarn over, pull through all 5 hoops that are on your needle, and then chain 1. That makes the puff for this particular dip down puff. Again, you're going to yarn over and go into the previous row's V, pull it back up through. After you come up, making sure everything's even across there, repeat it a second time into that same stitch. You've got 3 here that you just added and your 2 original ones to make 5. Pull through all 5 of those and chain 1. And then on your end, I'm just doing a double crochet to get me ready for the next row. And then I'm changing colors every row to make the braided pattern. So then you're ready to turn. On this one, I'll change to white, and I'll be dipping down into the top of those blues. So this is the dip down puff stitch, or the drop puff, and it's going to look like that. You can do some neat things with this. You can also come across and dip this way And when you do that, and then you turn and do it the same way, they start crisscrossing. That's a neat way to use this particular stitch. It's real puffy. It makes a real soft blanket or pillowcase. It is a denser pattern. It is a denser stitch, so it'll be kind of thick and it'll take a little bit of yarn, but it is really fun, especially when you change colors like this, because it gives it that braided look. So I hope you enjoy the dip down puff stitch this Friday. Let us know if you make anything with it or if you have any questions. We'd love to hear them and see all your projects. Stay tuned again next Friday at 9 for the next stitch that we'll learn together, and happy crocheting this weekend.